The phone slipped from my trembling fingers as my mother's words echoed through the hospital corridor. I had just called them with the most terrifying news of my 28-year-old life. I needed emergency heart surgery within 2 weeks, or I could die. Instead of rushing to comfort me, instead of dropping everything to be by my side, my mother Patricia coldly informed me that my sister Hannah's wedding was in 10 days. They had already spent $30,000 on preparations, she explained with irritation in her voice, and I needed to reschedule my surgery. When I whispered that the cardiologist said waiting could be fatal, she hung up on me. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office had felt too bright that Tuesday morning, casting harsh shadows across his concerned face as he spread my test results across his mahogany desk. My hands shook as I stared at the echocardiogram images that might as well have been written in a foreign language, but the gravity in his voice needed no translation. Duro, Alexis, your congenital heart defect has progressed much faster than we anticipated, he said, his pen tapping nervously against his clipboard. The valve insufficiency has reached a critical stage. We need to schedule surgery within the next 2 weeks, or you're looking at potential heart failure. The words hit me like ice water. 28 years old and my body was betraying me in the most fundamental way possible. I had always known about my heart condition, born with a bicuspid aortic valve that the doctors said they would monitor throughout my life. But monitor had suddenly become emergency, and emergency meant my world was crumbling. What happens if I wait longer than 2 weeks? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Dr. Martinez removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes wearily. Alexis, I won't sugarcoat this. Sudden cardiac death becomes a very real possibility. Your valve is barely functioning and your heart is working overtime to compensate. We cannot delay this any longer. I stumbled through the scheduling process in a daze, my mind spinning as the surgical coordinator, a kind woman named Beverly, explained the costs that my insurance wouldn't cover. $15,000 for the portions not included in my plan. $15,000 I didn't have sitting in my savings account. The autumn air felt crisp against my face as I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at my phone. I needed to call my parents. They would help me figure this out. They would drop everything and be there for me, like parents were supposed to do during life-threatening crises. My finger trembled as I pressed their contact information. The phone rang 3 times before my father's voice came through the speaker. "Hello, sweetheart. How did your appointment go?" His tone was casual, like I had been getting a routine teeth cleaning instead of learning I might die. Dad, I need to tell you and Mom something really important. Can you put me on speaker? Sure, honey. Patricia, come here. Alexis wants to talk to both of us. I heard the shuffle of footsteps and my mother's voice calling from somewhere in the background about wedding flower arrangements before she picked up the extension. "Well, what is it, dear? We're incredibly busy today with Hannah's final dress fitting and the caterer needs to confirm the head count and—" "Mom, please, I just left Dr. Martinez's office. My heart condition has gotten much worse. I need surgery within 2 weeks, or—" I paused, the words sticking in my throat like broken glass. "Or I could die." Silence stretched across the phone line for what felt like an eternity. I expected gasps of concern, immediate questions about my well-being offers to drive down immediately from their home 3 hours away. Instead, I heard my mother sigh with what sounded distinctly like annoyance. "Oh, Alexis, the timing of this is just terrible." "Terrible timing," I repeated, certain I had misheard her. "Shh, Hannah's wedding is in 10 days, my father chimed in, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "We've been planning this for 18 months. The relatives are flying in from 12 different states. Your Aunt Sarah is coming all the way from Oregon, and your cousin Michael is driving down from Maine with his whole family." "I understand that, but this is about my life," the doctor said. Doctors always make things sound urgent to pressure people into quick decisions. My mother interrupted. Have you gotten a second opinion? Maybe you could schedule the surgery for after the wedding, or even after Hannah gets back from her honeymoon in Tuscany. That would give you more time to research surgeons and get your finances in order. The parking lot seemed to spin around me. Mom, are you suggesting I risk dying so Hannah can have her perfect wedding day? Don't be so dramatic, Alexis. You've had this heart thing your whole life and you've been fine. A few more weeks won't make that much difference. Besides, we've already put down deposits that we can't get back. The venue alone cost us $8,000, and that was just the deposit. The flowers were another $3,000, the photographer was $5,000, and don't even get me started on the catering costs. What about helping me with the surgery cost? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Insurance doesn't cover everything, and I need $15,000 that I don't have. Another pause. Then my father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sweetheart, we've spent nearly every penny we have on Hannah's wedding. We couldn't possibly come up with that kind of money right now. You'll have to look into payment plans with the hospital or maybe take out a loan. You're choosing Hannah's party over my life. I whispered the truth of it, hitting me like a physical blow. Shh, that's not fair, my mother snapped. This wedding represents the joining of two families, the continuation of our family legacy. Hannah has dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. You can't expect us to throw all of that away because of bad timing on your part. Bad timing on my part? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. I didn't choose when my heart would start failing. Look, we need to go, my father said with finality. We have to meet with the wedding planner in 20 minutes, and then we're driving to the venue to check on the setup for the rehearsal dinner. You're a smart girl, Alexis. You'll figure something out. Maybe you could ask some of your friends for help. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in absolute disbelief. I sat in that parking lot for another hour, watching normal people walk in and out of the medical building, dealing with their own health concerns while surrounded by families who actually cared about their well-being. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was truly alone in facing something that could kill me. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. The next morning, I woke up with a crushing weight on my chest that had nothing to do with my failing heart valve. I had barely slept, replaying my parents' words over and over, trying to find some alternative interpretation that didn't lead to the same devastating conclusion. Maybe they had been in shock. Maybe they needed time to process the information. Maybe if I talked to Hannah directly, sister to sister, she would understand the gravity of the situation and help me convince our parents to reconsider their priorities. Hannah lived only 45 minutes away from me in a trendy downtown loft that her fiancé Derek had purchased the previous year. As a successful pharmaceutical sales representative, she had always been the golden child in our family's eyes. The one with the prestigious career, the perfect relationship, and now the fairy tale wedding. Surely she wouldn't let me die for the sake of avoiding wedding complications. I called her at 9 in the morning, knowing she would be awake since she started work early most days. The phone rang several times before her voice came through bright and cheerful in a way that reminded me of our mother. Good morning, Alexis. What's going on? I'm actually getting ready to leave for my final cake tasting, so I only have a few minutes. Hannah, I need to talk to you about something serious. Did Mom and Dad tell you about my heart surgery? They mentioned you had some kind of medical appointment yesterday and that you were being your usual dramatic self about it, she said, and I could hear the sound of heels clicking across her hardwood floors. Something about wanting them to reschedule my wedding because of a procedure you need to have done. The casual dismissal in her tone made my stomach clench. Hannah, this isn't a routine procedure. My heart valve is failing, and if I don't have surgery within the next 2 weeks, I could die. Actually die. Oh, come on, Alexis. You've always been a hypochondriac. Remember when you were convinced you had appendicitis when we were teenagers and it turned out to be gas? Or when you thought that mole on your shoulder was cancer and the dermatologist said it was completely normal? This is different, Hannah. I have medical tests that prove. Look, I don't have time for this right now. My wedding is in 9 days, and there are still a million details to handle. Derek's family is arriving from California tomorrow, and I haven't even finished writing my vows yet. The last thing I need is you creating unnecessary drama and stress. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Hannah, I'm not creating drama. I'm trying to save my life. If this were really as serious as you're claiming, wouldn't the doctors have caught it earlier? You've been seeing cardiologists for years. It seems awfully convenient that this suddenly becomes a crisis right before my wedding day. The accusation hit me like a slap. Convenient. You think I'm making this up? I think you've always had a hard time when attention isn't focused on you, Hannah said, her voice turning sharp and cold. You did the same thing when I got engaged. Suddenly you had all these work problems and relationship issues that required family meetings and emotional support sessions. Now it's my wedding week, and mysteriously you have a life-threatening emergency that would require mom and dad to drop everything and focus on you instead. My hands began to shake as the full scope of her accusation sank in. Hannah, I can send you copies of my medical records. I can have Dr. Martinez call you directly to explain. Doctors exaggerate conditions all the time to make more money, she interrupted. It's a business, Alexis. They want to scare you into expensive procedures. I see it all the time in pharmaceutical sales. Doctors recommending treatments that patients don't really need because there's profit involved. So you think I'm lying, and you think my doctor is lying. I think you need to grow up and stop trying to sabotage my happiness, Hannah said, her voice rising. This wedding cost our parents their life savings, and they deserve to see at least one of their daughters succeed at something meaningful. Maybe, if you had gotten your life together and found someone to marry, you'd understand how important this day is. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. I might not live to see another wedding, Hannah, my own or anyone else's. Oh, stop being so dramatic. You're 28 years old and healthy. People don't just die from heart problems at your age unless they have serious underlying issues that would have been obvious for years. I've had a congenital heart defect since birth. You know that. Which has never been a problem before, she countered. Look, I really don't have time for this conversation. If you're genuinely sick, which I doubt, then you can handle it like an adult without disrupting my wedding. And if you're just looking for attention, then you need to find a therapist instead of bothering our parents during the most important week of my life. I tried one more time to reach her. Hannah, what if I'm telling the truth? What if I really could die? Then I guess you'll have to figure it out on your own because I'm not letting you ruin my wedding with fake emergencies. And Alexis, if you keep pushing this story and stressing out mom and dad, I will uninvite you from the wedding entirely. They don't need you causing problems when they should be celebrating. The line went dead and I found myself staring at my phone once again in complete disbelief. My own sister, the person who had shared a bedroom with me for the first 16 years of my life, was willing to risk my death rather than risk any disruption to her wedding festivities. I spent the rest of the morning forwarding my medical records to Hannah's email address, along with Dr. Martinez's contact information and the surgical coordinator's phone number. I included a detailed explanation of my condition, the timeline for surgery, and the potential consequences of delay. 2 hours later, I received a brief response. I skimmed through this, and it looks like typical medical scare tactics. Stop bothering me with this nonsense. That afternoon, I tried calling my parents again, hoping that perhaps 24 hours had given them time to reconsider their position. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice harried and stressed. Alexis, please tell me you're not calling to continue yesterday's conversation. We have the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night, and I'm coordinating with 3 different vendors while trying to manage family travel logistics. Mom, did you think about what I told you about the surgery deadline? I talked to Hannah this morning, and she confirmed what I suspected. You're exaggerating the situation because you're jealous of her happiness. Honey, it's okay to feel left behind sometimes, but manufacturing medical emergencies isn't the way to get attention. Hannah told you I was making this up. She explained that you've always been prone to hypochondria and that you have a pattern of creating crises when other people are experiencing success. I should have recognized the pattern myself. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My own family had created a narrative where I was the villain, the attention-seeking sister who would fake a life-threatening condition to steal focus from a wedding. They had chosen to believe this fiction, rather than face the possibility that their priorities were fundamentally wrong. Mom, I'm begging you to talk to Dr. Martinez directly. Just call him and ask, Alexis, I don't have time to chase down your doctors and validate feelings-based medical concerns. Hannah's wedding is in 8 days, and I have real responsibilities that require my attention. Figure out your situation like an adult and stop trying to manipulate our family during important events. She hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that my family had not only abandoned me, but had actively chosen to believe I was a liar, rather than confront their own selfishness. As evening fell, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by medical paperwork and bills I couldn't afford to pay, understanding for the first time in my life that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had conditions after all, and apparently I didn't meet them. The following morning brought a crushing awareness that time was running out and I was entirely on my own. With 7 days remaining until my surgery deadline, I threw myself into the humiliating process of begging for financial help from every possible source. My savings account contained exactly $3,200, less than a quarter of what I needed. I spent the morning on the phone with hospital billing departments, pleading for payment plans that might make the surgery possible. The financial coordinator, a patient woman named Sandra, explained that they could offer a plan for the full amount, but it would require a down payment of $7,500, money I simply didn't have. Have you considered medical loans? Sandra asked gently, clearly recognizing the desperation in my voice. There are companies that specialize in financing medical procedures, though the interest rates can be quite high. I spent the next several hours filling out loan applications online, only to be rejected by every single company due to my modest income as a graphic designer and my existing student loan debt. The rejection emails were form letters, cold and impersonal, but each one felt like another door slamming shut on my chances of survival. Swallowing what remained of my pride, I created a crowdfunding page on 3 different platforms, sharing my story and medical documentation in hopes that strangers might show more compassion than my own family. The process of writing about my situation in public felt like stripping naked in front of the world, but desperation had erased my capacity for embarrassment. By afternoon, I had raised exactly $230 from former college classmates and work acquaintances, people who barely knew me but were willing to contribute small amounts to help save my life. The contrast between their kindness and my family's cruelty was almost unbearable. With no other options remaining, I forced myself to reach out to extended family members, starting with my Aunt Carol, who had always been kind to me during family gatherings. Carol lived 2 states away and had 3 teenagers, but she had inherited some money from my grandmother several years earlier and might be able to help. "Oh, honey," Carol said when I explained the situation, her voice filled with genuine concern. "I had no idea you were dealing with something so serious. But Alexis, your parents told me that your surgery was elective, something cosmetic related to your heart that you wanted to have done, but didn't actually need." The lies kept multiplying. "And Carol, it's not elective. It's emergency surgery to replace a failing valve. I could die without it." That's not what Patricia told me when I called to confirm my travel plans for Hannah's wedding. She said you were having some kind of optional procedure and that you were upset because the timing conflicted with wedding activities. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of my family's deception. They weren't just refusing to help me, they were actively sabotaging my attempts to get help from others by spreading false information about my condition. Would you be willing to call my doctor to verify the information I'm giving you? I asked, hoping that someone in my family would take the step of seeking truth. Sweetie, I don't really feel comfortable getting involved in family medical disputes. If your parents aren't concerned, then maybe you should get a second opinion before moving forward with such a major surgery. After we hung up, I called my cousin Jake in Colorado, who had always been more like a brother to me growing up. Jake worked in construction and had done well for himself, and I thought he might be willing to help if he understood the situation. Alexis, I wish I could help you, he said after I explained everything, but I actually just talked to your parents yesterday about something weird. I saw them at Rothwell Jewelers downtown buying what looked like an extremely expensive diamond bracelet. When I asked them about it, they said it was a surprise wedding gift for Hannah, something about a $25,000 custom piece that they special ordered months ago. The blood drained from my face. $25,000. Yeah, I was shocked too. Your dad was bragging about how it was a family heirloom quality piece that Hannah could pass down to her daughters someday. I actually mentioned that it seemed like a lot of money to spend on a wedding gift, and your mom said they were willing to make sacrifices for Hannah's special day. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My parents had claimed they were financially unable to help with my life-saving surgery, but they had $25,000 available for luxury jewelry. They had money. They simply chose to spend it on wedding extravagances rather than their daughter's survival. Jake, did they mention anything about my health situation when you saw them? Not a word. They seemed completely focused on wedding preparations and kept talking about how perfect everything was going to be. Your mom did mention that she hoped you wouldn't cause any drama at the ceremony, but she didn't explain what she meant by that. After ending the call with Jake, I sat in my kitchen staring at the medical bills spread across my table and trying to process the magnitude of my family's betrayal. They had lied to extended family members about the nature of my surgery. They had money available that they were spending on luxury items instead of my medical care. And they were actively working to ensure I had no support system during the most frightening period of my life. I called 3 more family members that evening: my Uncle Robert, my cousin Amanda, and my great-aunt Dorothy. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial concern, followed by confusion about conflicting information they had received from my parents, then reluctance to get involved in what they perceived as a family dispute rather than a medical emergency. By the end of the day, my crowdfunding campaigns had reached a total of $412, and I had successfully sold my television, my laptop, and most of my furniture to a second-hand dealer for another $800. I was still more than $10,000 short of what I needed with 6 days remaining until my surgery deadline. That night, I lay in my nearly empty apartment on an air mattress I had borrowed from my neighbor, staring at the ceiling and trying to comprehend how completely alone I had become. My parents had chosen wedding expenses over my life. My sister had chosen her perfect day over my survival, and my extended family had been manipulated into believing I was the problem rather than the victim. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself wondering if this was how people felt before they gave up entirely, when the world proved itself to be a place where love had conditions and family loyalty had price tags that some people simply couldn't afford to meet. Thursday morning arrived with the crushing reality that I had exactly 5 days left before my surgery deadline, and I was still $8,000 short of the amount needed to proceed. My body seemed to be responding to the stress and delay by deteriorating faster than Dr. Martinez had predicted. I woke up with chest pain so severe that I had trouble catching my breath, and walking from my bedroom to my kitchen left me feeling dizzy and weak. Despite my physical condition, I forced myself to go to work, knowing that I couldn't afford to lose any income when every dollar mattered. I worked as a freelance graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm, and I had a crucial client presentation scheduled for that afternoon. The client, a local restaurant chain, was considering a major rebranding campaign that could result in a 6-month contract worth $15,000, exactly what I needed to cover my medical costs. I spent the morning perfecting my presentation slides, checking and double-checking every detail while trying to ignore the irregular heartbeat that seemed to be getting worse by the hour. My colleague Marcus, who worked in the cubicle next to mine, kept glancing over with concern. "Alexis, you look terrible today," he said during our lunch break, studying my pale complexion and the dark circles under my eyes. "Are you feeling okay?" Marcus was the only person at work who knew about my heart condition, and he had been incredibly supportive since I first shared my diagnosis. He was one of the few people in my life who had never questioned the validity of my medical concerns or suggested that I was exaggerating my situation. "I'm hanging in there," I said, though even talking felt exhausting. "I just need to get through this presentation and then hopefully I'll have enough money to move forward with the surgery." What did your family decide about helping you?" he asked, assuming that any normal family would have rallied around their daughter during a life-threatening crisis. I hadn't told Marcus about my parents' refusal to help, partly because I was ashamed and partly because the situation was so unthinkable that I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. "They're dealing with some other financial obligations right now," I said, which was technically true even if those obligations involved luxury jewelry and wedding extravagances. The client presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock in our main conference room. The restaurant executives, 3 middle-aged men in expensive suits who looked like they had never missed a meal in their lives, arrived promptly on time. I had prepared extensively for this meeting, knowing that landing this contract could literally save my life. I made it through the first 15 minutes of my presentation, successfully walking them through the current brand analysis and explaining the psychological principles behind effective restaurant marketing. My proposed logo designs were strong, my color scheme recommendations were backed by solid research, and the executives seemed genuinely interested in my ideas. Then, during the middle of explaining my social media strategy recommendations, the chest pain intensified dramatically. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart with a steel fist, and my vision began to blur around the edges. I tried to continue speaking, but the words started coming out wrong, and I could see confusion spreading across the clients' faces. "The Instagram campaign would focus on," I began, then felt my knees buckle unexpectedly. The room tilted sideways, and I had to grab the edge of the conference table to keep from collapsing completely. My presentation remote clattered to the floor as I struggled to remain upright. Alexis." Marcus jumped up from his seat along the wall where he had been observing the meeting. "Are you okay?" The 3 executives looked alarmed and uncomfortable, clearly unsure whether they were witnessing a medical emergency or some kind of strange performance art. I tried to apologize and continue with my presentation, but my heart was beating so irregularly that I could barely focus on anything, except the fear that this might be the moment my weakened valve finally gave out completely. "I think we should call this meeting short," the lead executive said, gathering his papers with obvious concern. "Ms. Thompson, you should see a doctor immediately. You don't look well at all." Marcus helped me to a chair as the clients made their hasty exit, taking my potential life-saving contract with them. Within minutes, the conference room was empty except for the 2 of us, and I found myself crying from frustration as much as from physical pain. "Oh, that's it," Marcus said firmly. "I'm driving you to the emergency room right now." "I can't afford another ER visit," I protested weakly. "The last one cost me $1,200 that I don't have." Alexis, you almost passed out during a business presentation. Your lips are turning blue and you're sweating profusely. This isn't something you can ignore until Monday. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever, though it was only 12 minutes away. Marcus held my hand while I focused on breathing steadily and trying not to panic about the fact that my condition was clearly deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. The emergency room triage nurse took one look at me and immediately moved me to the front of the line, which was both reassuring and terrifying. Dr. Peterson, the attending physician, ran an EKG and several blood tests before delivering news that confirmed my worst fears. My heart function had declined significantly since my appointment with Dr. Martinez just 4 days earlier. The strain of stress and the delay in treatment were causing my condition to progress more rapidly than typical cases. Miss Thompson, your heart is working extremely hard to compensate for the failing valve, Dr. Peterson explained, showing me the irregular patterns on my EKG readout. We need to get you to surgery as soon as possible, ideally within the next 2 or 3 days. The surgery is scheduled for Monday, I told him, but I don't have the money to pay for it yet. Dr. Peterson looked puzzled. This is a life-threatening condition. Have you applied for emergency assistance through our financial aid program? I'm $8,000 short, even with assistance, I explained. I've been trying to raise the money, but I'm running out of time. Notes, what about family support? In cases like this, families usually find a way to help cover emergency medical costs. The question felt like salt in an open wound. My family is dealing with other financial priorities right now. From my bed in the emergency room, I tried calling my parents one more time, hoping that perhaps the news of my deteriorating condition might finally break through their wedding-focused tunnel vision. My father answered after 6 rings, and I could hear wedding music and laughter in the background. Dad, I'm in the emergency room. My condition has gotten worse, and the doctors say I need surgery within the next few days. Or I could go into heart failure. Alexis, we're at Hannah's rehearsal dinner right now. The entire family is here and we're about to start the toasts. Can this wait until tomorrow? Can it wait? I repeated, hardly believing what I was hearing. Dad, I'm in the hospital. I might be dying. Sweetheart, you've been saying that for days now and you're still talking and walking around. If it were really that serious, wouldn't you be in the intensive care unit or something? Look, we'll call you tomorrow, after the wedding. Excitement dies down. Okay. The line went dead and I found myself staring at my phone while Marcus watched with growing horror. Did he just hang up on you while you're in the emergency room? Marcus asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I tried calling Hannah's phone thinking that perhaps she would answer and could convince our parents to take my situation seriously. The call went directly to voicemail and her outgoing message cheerfully announced that she was unavailable due to wedding festivities and would return calls after her honeymoon in Tuscany. As I lay in that hospital bed, connected to heart monitors and IV lines, I realized that my family was at a party celebrating love and commitment while I faced the very real possibility of dying alone. They had chosen champagne toasts and wedding cake over their daughter's survival, and they were doing it with joy and enthusiasm rather than regret. Dr. Peterson discharged me with strict instructions to avoid any physical exertion and to return immediately if my symptoms worsened. He also gave me the name of a social worker who specialized in helping patients navigate financial assistance programs, though he warned me that emergency funding usually took weeks to process, time I didn't have. Marcus drove me home in silence, both of us processing the reality that my family had completely abandoned me during the most critical moment of my life. As we pulled into my apartment complex, I realized that tomorrow was Friday, Hannah's wedding day, and by Monday it might be too late for surgery to save me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started to wonder if my parents would even attend my funeral, or if they would consider it poor timing that might interfere with Hannah's honeymoon. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast, matching my mood as I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing insistently on my nightstand. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. I had no energy left for dealing with debt collectors or telemarketers, and my chest felt like someone had placed a concrete block on top of it during the night. "Hello," I answered weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Alexis, this is Derek, Hannah's fiancé. We need to talk." I sat up slowly, confused by the unexpected call. Derek had always been polite during family gatherings, but we had never had a personal conversation. He was a software engineer who worked for a major tech company, quiet and thoughtful in a way that had always seemed like a perfect complement to Hannah's more outgoing personality. "Derek, is everything okay? Isn't today your wedding day?" "That's exactly why I'm calling," he said, and I could hear genuine distress in his voice. "Alexis, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is it true that you need emergency heart surgery and that your parents refuse to help you pay for it?" The question caught me off guard. "How do you know about that?" Last night at the rehearsal dinner, Hannah was talking to her bridesmaids while they were getting their nails done. I was walking by the spa room to check on the timeline for this morning's preparations when I overheard her bragging about how she had taught you a lesson about attention-seeking behavior. She was laughing about how your parents had refused to reschedule anything for your fake medical drama, and how proud she was that the family had finally learned to ignore your manipulative tactics. My heart sank even further if that was possible. She said that, Alexis, she was laughing about it. Actually laughing while describing how you had begged for help with surgery costs. She told her friends that you had always been jealous of her success, and that you were probably making up the whole medical emergency to try to steal attention from her wedding week. I closed my eyes, feeling the last small hope I had been harboring for my sister's humanity finally die. "Derek, why are you calling me about this?" "Because I've been engaged to Hannah for 2 years, and I thought I knew what kind of person she was, but listening to her last night, Alexis, she was describing someone who might actually die, and she was treating it like a joke. She was proud of herself for convincing your parents to ignore your medical crisis." Derek's voice cracked slightly, and I realized he was genuinely upset. I kept thinking there had to be some misunderstanding, that maybe you really were exaggerating or that the situation wasn't as serious as it sounded. So I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I looked up your doctor online and read about the type of surgery you need. "You researched my condition?" Alexis, people die from what you have. The surgery you need isn't optional or cosmetic. It's literally life-saving. And Hannah knows that. She looked up the same information I did, but she's choosing to pretend it's not serious, because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting that our wedding is less important than your life. I felt tears starting to flow, partly from grief and partly from the unexpected relief of having someone finally validate the reality of my situation. "Derek, I don't know what to say." "I'm supposed to marry her in 6 hours." He continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm supposed to promise to love and honor a woman who is willing to let her sister die rather than postpone a party. I'm supposed to start a family with someone who thinks medical emergencies are attention-seeking behavior. Are you having second thoughts about the wedding?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. "I've been having second thoughts since the moment I overheard that conversation. But Alexis, there are 300 people flying in from across the country, vendors who have been paid a venue that's decorated and ready. The financial and social consequences of calling off the wedding now would be enormous." "I understand," I said, and I genuinely did. Derek was trapped by the same social and financial pressures that had influenced my parents' decision to prioritize the wedding over my health. But I can't marry someone who would let you die for the sake of party logistics, Derek said firmly. And I can't let you die either, especially when I have the power to help you. What do you mean? I have money in my investment account. Money I've been saving for a down payment on a house after Hannah and I got married. It's not enough to solve all your problems, but I can contribute $5,000 toward your surgery costs immediately. I'll transfer the money to you this morning. The generosity of his offer overwhelmed me. Derek, I can't accept that. That's your future with Hannah. My future with Hannah was already over the moment I learned what kind of person she really is, he said sadly. I just haven't figured out how to handle the logistics of ending an engagement on our wedding day. You're really thinking about calling off the wedding? Alexis, I've spent 2 years planning a life with someone who I thought was kind and compassionate. Last night, I discovered that she's willing to let her sister die to avoid inconveniencing wedding guests. How could I possibly go through with marrying her? Derek transferred the $5,000 within an hour of our phone call, and the notification from my bank felt like a small miracle. Combined with my crowdfunding donations and the money I had raised from selling my possessions, I now had approximately $8,000. Still short of what I needed, but closer than I had been since this nightmare started. There's something else I need to tell you, Derek said when he called back to confirm the transfer had gone through. Your parents aren't just spending money on wedding expenses. Yesterday, I overheard your father bragging to my dad about the European vacation he and your mother have planned for next month. A 3-week trip to Italy and France that cost them $12,000. They're taking a vacation. Apparently, they booked it months ago as a reward for themselves after successfully planning Hannah's wedding. Your father was talking about the first-class flights and the luxury hotels they reserved. Alexis, your parents have money available for European vacations, but they told you they couldn't afford to help with your surgery. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. My parents had claimed financial hardship while planning luxury travel and purchasing expensive jewelry. They had chosen vacation pleasures and wedding extravagances over their daughter's survival, and they had done it deliberately and with full knowledge of what their choices meant. Derek, what are you going to do about the wedding? I don't know yet, he admitted. I keep thinking about all the people who have traveled here, all the money that's been spent, all the expectations that have been created. But I also keep thinking about the fact that I'm supposed to promise to love and honor someone who laughs about her sister's medical emergencies. You don't have to make any decisions because of me, I said, though part of me hoped he would choose not to marry my heartless sister. Oh, actually, I do, Derek said quietly, because if I marry Hannah, knowing what I know now, then I become complicit in her cruelty. I become the kind of person who enables someone to let their family member die for the sake of social convenience. After we hung up, I sat in my empty apartment staring at my bank balance and trying to process the fact that my sister's fiancé had shown more compassion for my situation in one morning than my entire family had shown all week. Derek barely knew me, but he had been willing to sacrifice his own financial security to help save my life. Meanwhile, my parents were planning European vacations. My sister was laughing about my medical crisis with her friends, and I was still 3 days away from a surgery that I might not be able to afford even with Derek's generous help. As I prepared to face Hannah's wedding day, I realized that this experience had taught me something valuable about the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually love you. Sometimes the people who barely know you will move mountains to help you, while the people who raised you will step over your dying body to get to a party. The afternoon before Hannah's wedding, I found myself in the uncomfortable position of trying to decide whether to attend the ceremony at all. Derek's morning phone call had left me emotionally drained and physically exhausted, but it had also planted the seed of an idea that was growing stronger by the hour. My family had spent the entire week telling extended relatives and wedding guests different versions of why I might not be present at the celebration. Through various phone calls with cousins and family friends, I had learned that my parents were actively managing the narrative around my absence, positioning themselves as the victims of an unreasonable and attention-seeking daughter. Cousin Jake called me that afternoon with information that made my blood boil. "Alexis, I talked to your Aunt Sarah from Oregon this morning, and she mentioned something weird. Your parents told her that you were boycotting Hannah's wedding because you were jealous that she found love before you did." They said what? According to Aunt Sarah, your mom explained that you had been struggling with depression and resentment ever since Hannah got engaged, and that you had threatened to create problems during the wedding week unless the family paid more attention to your emotional needs. The manipulation was more extensive than I had realized. My parents weren't just refusing to help me during a medical crisis. They were actively destroying my reputation within our extended family to justify their callousness. Did Aunt Sarah believe that story? I asked, dreading the answer. She seemed confused because it didn't match the person she remembered you being, but your parents sounded very convincing. They told her that you had a history of mental health issues and attention-seeking behavior that had gotten worse as you approached 30 without achieving any major life milestones. Jake, none of that is true. I figured as much, which is why I'm calling you. But Alexis, they're telling this story to everyone. Uncle Robert heard the same version, and so did your great-aunt Dorothy. Your parents are basically conducting a character assassination campaign to make sure that if you don't show up to the wedding, everyone will blame you, instead of questioning why they didn't support you during a medical emergency. The calculated nature of their deception was staggering. They had created an entire false narrative about my mental state and motivations, ensuring that my absence from the wedding would be interpreted as confirmation of my supposed psychological problems, rather than evidence of their neglect. "There's more," Jake continued. "Your mom also told people that you had asked them to lend you money for what she described as unnecessary cosmetic surgery, and that they had wisely refused to enable your impulsive spending habits." Cosmetic surgery? I could barely speak through my rage. She told Aunt Sarah that you wanted some kind of heart procedure that wasn't medically necessary, but that you had convinced yourself you needed for emotional reasons. She made it sound like plastic surgery that you were trying to get them to finance. My parents had transformed my life-threatening medical emergency into a story about vanity and mental instability. They had protected their own image by destroying mine, ensuring that no one in our family would question their priorities or their decision to choose wedding expenses over their daughter's survival. That evening, Derek called me again with news that confirmed my growing suspicion that I needed to take more direct action to expose my family's true nature. Alexis, I've been thinking about our conversation all day and I've made a decision about the wedding." "What did you decide?" "William, I'm going through with the ceremony," he said. But before I could feel disappointed, he continued, "But I'm doing it for reasons that have nothing to do with Hannah." "I don't understand." "Your family has created a situation where the truth about what they've done to you will never come out unless someone forces it to come out. If I call off the wedding, they'll blame you for destroying Hannah's marriage and convince everyone that you're even more unstable and vindictive than they've already claimed." Derek's reasoning made perfect sense. A canceled wedding would only reinforce my parents' narrative about my supposed psychological problems and attention-seeking behavior. "But if the wedding goes forward as planned," Derek continued, "and if certain information about your medical situation happens to become public during the celebration, then your family won't be able to control the narrative anymore." "What kind of information?" "The kind of information that makes it impossible for people to believe that your surgery is cosmetic or that your condition isn't serious. The kind of information that forces your extended family to confront the reality of what your parents have done." I began to understand what Derek was suggesting. You want to expose them during the wedding. I want the truth to come out in a way that they can't spin or manipulate. Your parents have spent weeks lying to family members about your condition and your motivations. The only way to counteract those lies is to present undeniable evidence of the truth. Derek, that would ruin Hannah's wedding day. Hannah's wedding day deserves to be ruined, Derek said without hesitation. She's marrying me while planning to let her sister die. She's celebrating love and commitment while demonstrating that she has no understanding of either concept. Her perfect wedding day is built on a foundation of cruelty and deception. But what about all the guests? What about your family and the people who traveled here? Those people deserve to know what kind of family they're celebrating with. Your extended relatives deserve to know that they've been lied to about why you weren't supported during a medical emergency. My family deserves to know what kind of people they're about to be connected to through marriage. Derek's plan was both appealing and terrifying. Part of me wanted justice, wanted my family to face consequences for their callousness and deception. But another part of me worried about the collateral damage that exposing them publicly would cause. Oh, what exactly are you thinking about doing? I'm thinking about making sure that certain medical documents and certain recorded conversations become available to family members who have been given false information about your situation. I'm thinking about ensuring that the truth comes out in a way that your parents can't deny or spin. Recorded conversations. Alexis, please tell me you have some kind of documentation of your parents' actual responses to your medical crisis. Please tell me there's some way to prove that they said what they said and did what they did. I thought about the phone calls I had secretly recorded earlier in the week, insurance against my own memory in case I needed to prove to medical professionals that I didn't have family support. I had been so shocked by my mother's callousness that I had started recording our conversations to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding or misremembering her words. I have recordings, I admitted quietly. Perfect, Derek said with satisfaction. Tomorrow is going to be a very educational day for our families. As we finalized the details of Derek's plan, I realized that attending Hannah's wedding was no longer just about supporting my sister or maintaining family relationships. It was about ensuring that the truth finally came to light, and that the people who had abandoned me during my darkest hour would face the consequences of their choices. For the first time in a week, I felt something other than despair and betrayal. I felt the beginning of hope that justice might actually be possible even if it came at the cost of destroying the perfect wedding day that my family had valued more than my life. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and the kind of golden sunlight that photographers dream about for outdoor weddings. As I prepared for Hannah's ceremony, I made sure my phone was fully charged and that I had backup recording equipment ready. Derek's plan required concrete evidence of my family's callousness, and I was determined to provide it. I called my mother at 8 in the morning, knowing she would be awake and stressed about final wedding preparations. The conversation I was about to initiate would either provide the evidence we needed or confirm that my family was capable of learning from their mistakes and changing their behavior. Based on the week I had endured, I wasn't optimistic about the latter possibility. Alexis, my mother's voice was harried and distracted when she answered. Please tell me you're not calling with more medical drama on Hannah's wedding day. I had started recording before dialing her number. Mom, I just wanted you to know that I'm planning to attend the wedding, but my condition has gotten worse since we last talked. Your condition, she repeated with audible irritation. Alexis, can we please drop this pretense? Hannah's wedding day is supposed to be about love and family celebration, not about your need for constant attention. Pretense. You know exactly what I mean. This whole heart surgery story that you've been pushing all week. You've had heart murmurs and irregularities your entire life, and they've never been a serious problem before. Suddenly, the week of Hannah's wedding, you develop a life-threatening emergency that requires immediate attention and financial assistance from the family. My mother's tone was becoming increasingly harsh, and I realized that the stress of wedding coordination was stripping away any pretense of maternal concern she might have maintained earlier in the week. Mom, Dr. Martinez has explained that my condition has deteriorated significantly. The surgery really is necessary to prevent heart failure. Doctors exaggerate conditions to generate business, Alexis. Everyone knows that. Hannah works in pharmaceutical sales, and she's explained to us how the medical industry operates. They create urgency around procedures that could easily be delayed or avoided entirely. So you think Dr. Martinez is lying about my diagnosis? I think you're 28 years old and perfectly capable of handling your own medical decisions without involving the family in unnecessary drama. If you genuinely believed you were dying, you would have figured out a way to pay for the surgery yourself instead of trying to guilt your family into rearranging their priorities. The callousness of her response was exactly what Derek and I had hoped to capture, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow. Mom, what if I actually do need this surgery? What if waiting really could kill me? Then you should have taken better care of your health over the years, instead of ignoring medical advice until it became convenient to create a crisis, Patricia replied sharply. Besides, Hannah's wedding represents something much more significant than your individual medical concerns. More significant than my life. Your work's more significant than your tendency to manufacture emergencies when those other people are experiencing happiness, she corrected. This wedding cost us nearly every penny we had saved over the past 5 years. Hannah deserves to have her perfect day without her sister creating chaos and demanding that everyone focus on her instead. What about the money you spent on Hannah's wedding gift, the diamond bracelet that Cousin Jake saw you buying? My mother paused, and I could hear the shift in her tone as she realized I had information about their other expenditures. How we choose to spend our money on our daughter's wedding gifts is none of your business, Alexis. But helping your other daughter pay for life-saving surgery isn't your responsibility. Life-saving surgery, Patricia repeated mockingly. You've been saying that phrase all week like it means something. If this surgery were truly life-saving, your insurance would cover the full cost, and you wouldn't need to beg family members for money. Insurance doesn't work that way, Mom. Insurance works exactly that way for genuine emergencies. The fact that you need to pay out of pocket for this procedure proves that it's elective, not essential. You're trying to manipulate us into funding cosmetic medical work by calling it life-saving surgery. Cosmetic medical work. Heart valve procedures can be done for cosmetic reasons, Patricia said confidently, clearly repeating information she had researched to justify her position. Some people choose to have valve repairs to improve their exercise capacity or to eliminate minor symptoms that don't actually threaten their lives. That's obviously what you're pursuing. Mom, my valve is failing. If I don't have it replaced, my heart will eventually stop functioning properly. Eventually, meaning sometime in the distant future, not next week, she replied dismissively. You're using scare tactics to try to force us to disrupt Hannah's wedding planning, and it's not going to work. What if you're wrong? What if I really could die without this surgery? Patricia's response was colder than anything she had said previously. Then I guess you'll have to decide whether maintaining this dramatic story is worth risking your health. But Alexis, I want to be very clear about something. Even if your condition is as serious as you claim, Hannah's wedding is still more important to this family right now. The admission was exactly what I needed to capture on recording, but hearing my mother explicitly state that my sister's party was more valuable than my life left me speechless for several seconds. Abba, Hannah's wedding is more important than whether I live or die. Hannah's wedding represents the continuation of our family legacy. the celebration of love and commitment, and the culmination of years of planning and financial sacrifice. Your medical situation, regardless of its severity, is ultimately about you making decisions about your own body. The two things aren't comparable in terms of their significance to the family as a whole. Oh, so if I die waiting for surgery, that would be less important than Hannah having her perfect wedding day? You're not going to die, Alexis, because this isn't actually a life-threatening emergency. But even if it were yes, I would rather see Hannah have the wedding day she's dreamed of since childhood than see you manipulate the family into chaos over medical decisions that you should be handling independently. My mother hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me staring at my phone and trying to process the fact that she had explicitly chosen my sister's party over my survival. The recording captured everything: her dismissal of my medical condition, her belief that I was lying about the severity of my situation, and most damning of all, her statement that Hannah's wedding was more important than my life, even if my condition really was as serious as I claimed. As I prepared for the wedding ceremony, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. My mother had removed any remaining doubt about where my family's priorities lay, and she had done it in her own voice, using her own words in a conversation that I could now share with anyone who questioned the truth of my situation. For the first time in a week, I wasn't the only person who knew what kind of people my parents really were. By the end of Hannah's wedding day, everyone else would know too. I chose my outfit for Hannah's wedding with careful consideration, selecting a navy blue dress that complemented my pale complexion rather than hiding it. After a week of minimal sleep stress and deteriorating health, I looked exactly like what I was: a seriously ill woman who was fighting for her life. My cheeks were hollow, dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my normally healthy skin had taken on a grayish pallor that no amount of makeup could completely conceal. Marcus had offered to accompany me to the wedding, partly for moral support and partly because he was genuinely worried about my physical condition. As my closest friend and the only person outside my family who knew the full extent of what I was dealing with, he understood that attending this celebration would be emotionally and physically challenging. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Marcus asked as he helped me into his car. "You look like you should be in a hospital bed, not at a wedding reception." I need to be there," I said simply. "There are things that need to happen today, and they can't happen if I'm not present." The wedding venue was a historic mansion, about 30 minutes outside the city, surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oak trees that provided the perfect backdrop for Hannah's fairy tale celebration. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I could see that my parents had spared no expense in creating their vision of the perfect wedding day. White silk draping fluttered from every tree branch, thousands of white roses adorned the ceremony arch, and uniformed staff members directed guests toward the outdoor seating area, where 300 folding chairs had been arranged in perfect rows. The scene was breathtakingly beautiful and represented exactly the kind of magical celebration that justified spending $30,000. And prioritizing above everything else, including a daughter's medical emergency. Marcus parked near the back of the guest parking area, and I took a moment to gather my strength before walking across the uneven grass toward the ceremony site. The short walk left me slightly breathless, and I had to pause twice to rest, which drew concerned glances from other arriving guests. My Aunt Carol spotted me first, her expression immediately shifting from wedding day joy to genuine alarm as she took in my appearance. "Alexis, honey, are you feeling all right?" she asked, rushing over to steady my arm as I navigated the slight incline toward the seating area. "You look very pale." "I've been dealing with some health issues," I said truthfully, "but I wanted to be here for Hannah's special day." "Health issues? Your parents mentioned you might not be able to attend due to some minor medical appointments, but they didn't say anything about you being seriously ill." Before I could respond, my Uncle Robert approached with his wife Margaret, both of them wearing expressions of growing concern as they observed my obviously deteriorated condition. "Alexis, what's wrong?" Margaret asked directly. "You look like you've lost 20 pounds since we saw you last Christmas, and your color is terrible." She said she's been having health problems," Aunt Carol explained, though her tone suggested she was beginning to suspect that health problems might be an understatement. More relatives began gathering around us, and I realized that my appearance was creating exactly the kind of disruption that my parents had been trying to avoid all week. I looked like someone who was genuinely ill, not someone who was seeking attention or manufacturing drama for personal gain. "Oh, what kind of health problems?" Uncle Robert asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had worked in hospital administration for 20 years and knew the difference between minor ailments and serious medical conditions. Heart problems," I said, simply letting the words speak for themselves. Heart problems," Margaret repeated, clearly shocked. "How serious are you getting treatment?" No. Before I could answer, I saw my parents approaching from the direction of the bride's preparation area, their faces registering a mixture of surprise and displeasure at seeing me surrounded by concerned relatives. They had obviously expected me to either skip the wedding entirely or attend quietly without drawing attention to my medical situation. "Alexis," my father said with forced cheerfulness as he joined our growing circle, "we're so glad you decided to come after all." Tom, what's this about Alexis having heart problems?" Uncle Robert asked directly. "She looks seriously ill." "Oh, you know how Alexis tends to worry about every little thing," Patricia said dismissively, moving to stand next to her husband in a show of united parental authority. "She's been concerned about some minor heart irregularities, but the doctors have assured us that it's nothing urgent." Nothing urgent?" Aunt Carol repeated, studying my face more closely. "Patricia, she looks like she belongs in a hospital, not at a wedding reception." "She's always been thin," my father said, though his tone suggested he was beginning to realize that my appearance was more alarming than he had anticipated. "And you know how stress affects people differently. She's probably just tired from work." "This isn't tired from work," Margaret said firmly, her nursing background evident in her assessment. "Alexis, have you been eating properly? Are you getting adequate medical care?" The question hung in the air as more guests began to take notice of our conversation and my obviously poor health. I could see my parents exchanging worried glances as they realized that their carefully constructed narrative about my attention-seeking behavior was being challenged by my actual appearance. "I'm managing my medical care as best I can," I said carefully, though it's been challenging to coordinate treatment around family events. "What exactly is wrong with your heart?" Uncle Robert asked directly, his professional experience making him unwilling to accept vague reassurances about minor irregularities. Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared with a small handheld microphone announcing that the ceremony would begin in 5 minutes and requesting that all guests take their seats. My parents looked relieved at the interruption, clearly hoping that the formal beginning of wedding activities would end the uncomfortable questions about my health. As everyone moved toward their assigned seats, I made my way to the back row where Marcus was waiting. The short walk left me feeling lightheaded, and I had to grip his arm for support as I sat down heavily in the folding chair. "No, everyone's staring at you," Marcus whispered, and I realized he was right. Word of my condition was spreading through the guest seating area, and relatives who hadn't seen me in months were clearly shocked by my appearance. "Good," I whispered back, settling in for what I knew would be the most emotionally complex wedding ceremony I had ever attended. As the string quartet began playing the processional music, I watched my parents take their seats in the front row, their backs rigid with tension. They had spent the week trying to control the narrative around my medical situation, but my physical appearance was telling a story that they couldn't spin or manipulate. The ceremony was about to begin, but the real drama was just getting started. The string quartet's gentle melody filled the afternoon air as Hannah made her grand entrance, looking absolutely radiant in a custom-designed gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. She walked down the petal-strewn aisle with our father beaming with the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're the center of everyone's attention, and that every detail of your special day is unfolding exactly as you had always imagined. I watched Derek's face as his bride approached the altar, searching for any sign of the internal conflict he had described during our phone conversations. He looked handsome and composed in his charcoal gray tuxedo, but I could detect a tension around his eyes that suggested he was struggling with emotions that had nothing to do with wedding day nerves. The officiant, a family friend named Reverend Matthews, who had known Hannah since childhood, welcomed the gathered guests with warm words about love commitment and the sacred nature of marriage vows. As he spoke about the importance of supporting couples through both joy and adversity, I couldn't help but think about the bitter irony of celebrating love and family loyalty while I sat dying in the back row. We gathered today to witness Hannah and Derek as they pledged their lives to each other. Reverend Matthews continued, promising to honor and cherish one another through sickness and health in times of plenty and in times of need. The traditional words felt like accusations in the context of my family's recent behavior. My parents sat in the front row, nodding approvingly at sentiments about family support and unconditional love that they had explicitly rejected when their own daughter needed help during a life-threatening medical crisis. As the ceremony progressed through readings and musical selections, I found myself fighting waves of dizziness and chest pain that seemed to be getting worse rather than better. The stress of being surrounded by family members who had abandoned me, combined with the physical toll of my deteriorating condition, was creating a perfect storm of medical distress. Marcus noticed my struggle and quietly asked if I needed to leave, but I shook my head determined to see this through. Derek had risked his own future to help me expose the truth about my family, and I wasn't going to let physical discomfort prevent me from playing my part in his plan. During the exchange of vows, Hannah spoke eloquently about finding her soulmate and looking forward to building a life based on mutual support and unwavering dedication to each other's well-being. Her words were beautiful and heartfelt, and they would have been moving if they weren't coming from someone who had spent the week laughing about her sister's potential death. Derek's vows were more subdued but equally eloquent, focusing on the importance of honesty, integrity, and standing by the people you love when they need you most. Several times during his speech, his eyes found mine in the crowd, and I realized he was speaking as much to me and to the assembled guests as he was to Hannah. Asab, I promise to be the kind of partner who shows up during difficult times, Derek said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the outdoor seating area. Someone who prioritizes the people I love over social conveniences or personal comfort. The words were carefully chosen, and I could see some of my relatives shifting uncomfortably as they began to pick up on the subtext of his message. Derek was laying the groundwork for what was about to come, preparing the audience for revelations that would completely change their understanding of the family dynamics they thought they knew. As Reverend Matthews moved toward the final portion of the ceremony, preparing to pronounce Derek and Hannah husband and wife, I felt my heart begin to race in a way that had nothing to do with emotional stress. The irregular beating pattern that had been troubling me all week suddenly intensified dramatically, and my vision began to blur around the edges. I tried to focus on breathing steadily and staying upright in my chair, but my body was clearly reaching the limits of what it could endure. The combination of physical illness, emotional trauma, and the stress of being surrounded by people who had betrayed me was pushing my weakened cardiovascular system beyond its capacity to function normally. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, Reverend Matthews announced in the traditional words that usually prompt nervous laughter, Let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The moment stretched in perfect silence as 300 guests sat quietly waiting for the formality to conclude so the ceremony could reach its happy ending. But as the Reverend opened his mouth to continue, I felt my chest constrict with a pain so severe that I couldn't suppress a small gasp. Marcus immediately turned toward me with concern, and his movement drew the attention of other guests in our section. I tried to wave him off, not wanting to create a disruption during the most important moment of the ceremony, but my body was no longer responding to my willpower. The chest pain intensified into something that felt like a steel band tightening around my heart, and my breathing became shallow and labored. I gripped the sides of my folding chair, trying desperately to stay conscious and upright, but black spots were beginning to dance across my field of vision. Alexis, Marcus whispered urgently, recognizing that this was not a minor episode of discomfort, but a genuine medical emergency. I tried to tell him I was fine, that I just needed a moment to recover, but no words came out. Instead, I felt my body slumping sideways in the chair as my weakened heart finally succumbed to the stress and pressure that had been building all week. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of Marcus calling for help and the rustling of wedding guests turning in their seats to see what was happening in the back row. Hannah's perfect ceremony was about to become the backdrop for the medical crisis that my family had spent the week denying was real. When dramatic moments happen during formal events, there's always a split second of confusion where people aren't sure whether what they're witnessing is part of the planned program or an actual emergency. That confusion lasted only moments as Marcus's shouts for medical assistance made it clear that someone was seriously ill. I would later learn that my collapse created immediate chaos, as relatives who had just been questioning my health rushed to help wedding guests called for ambulances. And my parents realized that their carefully managed narrative about my attention-seeking behavior was crumbling in front of 300 witnesses. But in the moment of my collapse, all I experienced was the strange relief of finally letting go of the struggle to appear stronger than I was allowing my body to demand the attention that my family had refused to provide. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area cast an unforgiving glow over the faces of my family members as they gathered in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their formal wedding attire looking absurdly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. The beautiful outdoor ceremony had been abruptly transformed into a medical emergency when the paramedics arrived loading me onto a stretcher, while 300 wedding guests watched in stunned silence. I regained consciousness during the ambulance ride, my vision slowly clearing to reveal Marcus holding my hand, while an EMT monitored my vital signs. The paramedic, a competent woman named Jessica, explained that my heart rhythm had become dangerously irregular and that my blood pressure had dropped to concerning levels before stabilizing with medication. "You're lucky your friend recognized the signs of cardiac distress," Jessica told me as we pulled into the hospital emergency bay. "Another few minutes, and this could have been much worse." Dr. Peterson, the same emergency physician who had treated me earlier in the week, immediately ordered a comprehensive cardiac workup when he saw me returning so soon after my previous visit. The EKG results showed significant deterioration from my earlier tests, confirming that my condition was progressing exactly as Dr. Martinez had warned it would. "Miss Thompson, your heart is in serious distress," Dr. Peterson explained as he reviewed the test results. "We need to get you stabilized and then transfer you immediately for emergency surgery. This can't wait until Monday." Meanwhile, in the waiting room, my extended family was demanding answers from my parents about why I had collapsed during what should have been a joyful celebration. Aunt Carol, Uncle Robert, and several cousins had followed the ambulance to the hospital their wedding day, joy replaced by growing alarm about my condition and increasing suspicion about the conflicting stories they had been told. Derek had also come to the hospital, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone and his formal jacket draped over his arm. Hannah had remained at the venue with the wedding coordinator, trying to salvage some kind of reception for the guests who hadn't left immediately after the ambulance departed. Patricia, I need you to explain something to me, Aunt Carol said firmly as she confronted my mother in the waiting room. Alexis collapsed during the wedding ceremony, and the paramedics said she was having cardiac distress. But you told me yesterday that she was dealing with minor medical appointments, nothing serious. Whoa, she's always been dramatic about health issues, my mother replied defensively, but her voice lacked the confident dismissiveness she had displayed all week. Seeing me loaded into an ambulance had clearly shaken her certainty about the situation. Dramatic. Uncle Robert interjected his hospital administration background, making him intolerant of medical minimization. Patricia, I've seen thousands of patients over the years, and your daughter looked like someone in the advanced stages of heart failure. That's not dramatic. That's life-threatening. Derek, who had been listening quietly to the family conversation, finally spoke up with information that changed everything. Oh, actually, there's something all of you need to know about Alexis's medical situation, he said, his voice cutting through the family chatter with unmistakable authority. She's been trying to get emergency heart surgery for the past week, and her parents refused to help her pay for it. The waiting room fell silent as Derek's words sank in. Several family members turned to stare at my parents, their faces reflecting growing comprehension and horror. What do you mean refused to help? Aunt Carol asked slowly. I mean that Alexis needs $15,000 for surgery that could save her life, and Patricia and Tom told her that Hannah's wedding was more important than her medical emergency. Oh, that's not true, my father said quickly, but his defensive tone suggested that Derek's accusation had hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Oh, actually, it is true. Derek continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out his phone. And I have recorded proof. Derek had convinced me earlier that morning to share the recording of my conversation with my mother, knowing that it would be crucial evidence if we needed to expose my family's callousness to extended relatives. He had transferred the audio file to his own device, ensuring that the truth would come out regardless of what happened to me during the wedding. This is a conversation between Alexis and her mother from this morning. Derek announced, pressing play on the recording that would destroy my parents' carefully constructed narrative once and for all. My mother's voice filled the waiting room with crystal clarity. Hannah's wedding represents something much more significant than your individual medical concerns. Even if your condition is as serious as you claim, Hannah's wedding is still more important to this family right now. I would rather see Hannah have the wedding day she's dreamed of since childhood than see you manipulate the family into chaos over medical decisions. The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Carol's face had gone pale, Uncle Robert was staring at my parents with undisguised disgust, and several cousins were shaking their heads in disbelief. The recording had captured not just my mother's words, but her tone. The cold dismissiveness, the calculated cruelty, the explicit prioritization of a party over her daughter's life. "Oh, Patricia," Aunt Carol said in a voice that shook with emotion, "did you actually tell Alexis that Hannah's wedding was more important than her life?" "You don't understand the context," my mother began, but Derek interrupted by playing another section of the recording. "Oh, then I guess you'll have to decide whether maintaining this dramatic story is worth risking your health," my mother's voice continued from the phone speaker. "But Alexis, I want to be very clear about something. Even if your condition is as serious as you claim, Hannah's wedding is still more important to this family right now." Uncle Robert stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Patricia, are you telling me that you knew your daughter might die without surgery and you chose to spend money on wedding expenses instead of helping her get medical treatment?" It's more complicated than that," my father said weakly, but Derek was ready with additional information that made their position even more indefensible. Whoa, it's actually not complicated at all, Derek said. Tom and Patricia have $30,000 available for wedding costs, $25,000 for luxury jewelry gifts, and $12,000 for a European vacation next month. But they told their daughter that they couldn't afford to help with life-saving surgery. The revelation about my parents' vacation plans and expensive gift purchases sent shockwaves through the waiting room. Cousin Jake, who had seen them buying the diamond bracelet, confirmed Derek's information, while other family members began to realize the full scope of my parents' financial deception. "You're taking a European vacation while your daughter can't afford heart surgery," Margaret asked in disbelief. Grandma Rose, who had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the confrontation, suddenly stood up with the aid of her walking cane, her 92-year-old frame radiating more dignity than anyone else in the room. "Patricia Thomas," she said in the strong, clear voice that had commanded family respect for decades. "I have never been more ashamed to call you my children." Mom, you don't understand," my father began, but Grandma Rose cut him off with a gesture. "But I understand perfectly. You chose a party over your daughter's life, and then you lied to the entire family about it. You turned us all against Alexis by making us believe she was unstable and attention-seeking when she was actually dying and desperate for help." Grandma Rose turned to address the rest of the family gathered in the waiting room. "I want everyone here to witness what I'm about to say. As of this moment, Patricia and Thomas are no longer beneficiaries of my estate. Every penny that would have gone to them will now go to Alexis's medical care and to establishing a fund for other family members who might face medical emergencies." The financial implications of Grandma Rose's decision were staggering. Her estate was worth several $100,000 money that my parents had been counting on to support their retirement plans. "You can't do that," my mother said desperately. "We made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can help Alexis now." "Adjust with what money?" Grandma Rose asked pointedly. "You've spent everything on weddings and vacations. And even if you had money available, the damage is already done. You showed your true character when you thought no one was watching." As if summoned by the family drama, Dr. Peterson appeared in the waiting room doorway with an update on my condition and news that would accelerate everything that was about to happen. "The family of Alexis Thompson," he called, and everyone turned toward him expectantly. "Though, how is she?" Derek asked immediately, his concern genuine, despite the complicated circumstances of their relationship. "She's stable for now, but she needs emergency surgery within the next 24 hours. Her condition has deteriorated significantly, and we can't wait any longer without risking permanent heart damage or worse." Dr. Peterson looked around the room at the assembled family members, clearly expecting someone to step forward and handle the logistics of emergency medical care. "Has the family arranged financing for the procedure?" he asked directly. Before my parents could respond with their usual excuses, Grandma Rose spoke up with the authority of someone who had just made a life-changing decision. "Doctor, how much money does Alexis need for her surgery?" "The total cost for emergency surgery, including the hospital stay and recovery, will be approximately $18,000 after insurance." Grandma Rose opened her purse and pulled out her checkbook, writing with the steady hand of someone who had managed family finances for decades. "I'm paying for my granddaughter's surgery in full," she announced, tearing off a check and handing it to Dr. Peterson. "Please proceed immediately." The gesture was both generous and devastating. Generous because it solved my financial crisis, instantly devastating because it highlighted exactly how easily my medical emergency could have been resolved if my family had chosen to prioritize my life over their social agenda. As Dr. Peterson left to process the payment and schedule my emergency surgery, the waiting room erupted in family arguments that had been building throughout the week. Aunts and uncles who had believed my parents' lies about my mental state were now demanding apologies and explanations. Cousins who had been told I was attention-seeking were expressing outrage about the deception. But the most significant conversation was happening between Derek and Hannah, who had finally arrived at the hospital still wearing her wedding gown, her perfect day thoroughly destroyed by the medical emergency that she had insisted was fake. "Derek, we need to talk about what happens now," Hannah said, approaching her new husband with obvious anxiety about the implications of the day's revelations. Derek looked at her for a long moment, this woman he had just married, but who had revealed herself to be capable of cruelty he couldn't comprehend or forgive. "Oh, Hannah, there's nothing to talk about," Derek said quietly. "I'm filing for annulment first thing Monday morning." Within 2 hours of Grandma Rose's check clearing the hospital's financial systems, I found myself being prepped for emergency surgery by a team of cardiovascular specialists who moved with the urgent efficiency that comes from knowing a patient's life hangs in the balance. Dr. Martinez had been called in despite the weekend timing, and he worked closely with the hospital's cardiac surgery team to ensure that my procedure would proceed without any further delays. The pre-surgical preparation gave me a chance to see the extended family members who had rallied around me once they learned the truth about my situation. Aunt Carol sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand while expressing remorse for not investigating my parents' claims more thoroughly. Alexis, I should have known something was wrong when your parents seemed so unconcerned about your health," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I've known you since you were born, and you've never been dramatic or attention-seeking. I should have trusted my instincts instead of believing their lies." Uncle Robert, who had taken charge of coordinating family logistics during the medical crisis, had already contacted several other relatives who hadn't been able to attend the wedding. By the time I was wheeled into surgery, my hospital room was filled with flowers, cards, and promises of support from family members who were horrified to learn how I had been treated. "We've started a family fund for your recovery expenses," Uncle Robert explained. "Everyone wants to contribute something, even if it's just a few dollars. We're not going to let you face this alone." The contrast between the family support I was receiving now and the complete abandonment I had experienced all week was almost overwhelming. People who barely knew me were offering financial assistance, emotional support, and practical help with everything from transportation to meal preparation during my recovery. Derek visited me just before I was taken to the operating room, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, but looking like a man who had aged years in the span of a single day. Alexis, I need you to know that no matter what happens with my marriage situation, I'm committed to seeing you through this recovery," he said earnestly. "You're going to need support over the next few months, and I want to be part of your chosen family." "Derek, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted firmly. "You showed me what kind of person my wife really is, and you probably saved me from years of unhappiness. The least I can do is make sure you have everything you need to get healthy and rebuild your life." As the anesthesia began to take effect, my last conscious thought was about the profound irony that Hannah's wedding day had ultimately become the catalyst for exposing my family's true nature and connecting me with people who genuinely cared about my well-being. The surgery itself took nearly 4 hours, during which my extended family maintained a vigil in the waiting room, while my parents sat isolated in a corner, shunned by relatives who could no longer look at them without disgust. Hannah had left the hospital shortly after Derek announced his intention to file for annulment, returning to their wedding venue to salvage whatever she could of a reception that most guests had already abandoned. Dr. Martinez emerged from the operating room with news that the procedure had been successful, but that my condition had been even more critical than the pre-surgical tests had indicated. "We were able to replace the damaged valve with a mechanical prosthetic," he explained to the assembled family members. "But I want everyone to understand how close we came to losing her. Another day or two of delay, and this surgery might not have been possible." The sobering news about my near-death experience prompted additional expressions of outrage toward my parents, who were forced to confront the reality that their week-long dismissal of my medical emergency had almost resulted in my death. Grandma Rose, who had remained at the hospital throughout the entire surgery despite her advanced age, made another announcement that would have lasting implications for my family's dynamics. "Well, I've been thinking about Patricia and Thomas's behavior this week," she said to the gathered relatives, "and I've decided that cutting them out of my will isn't sufficient consequences for what they've done." "What do you mean, Grandma?" Cousin Jake asked. "Oh, I mean that I'm calling an emergency family meeting for next weekend to discuss whether Patricia and Thomas should be excluded from future family events until they demonstrate genuine remorse for their actions and make substantial amends to Alexis. The prospect of being cut off from all family relationships, not just financial inheritance, was clearly something my parents hadn't considered. They had spent the week protecting their social reputation and wedding investments, but they were now facing the possibility of complete family ostracism as a result of their choices. My recovery from surgery was complicated by the emotional trauma of everything I had experienced, but it was also aided by the overwhelming support I received from relatives who were determined to compensate for my parents' neglect. Aunt Carol arranged to take leave from work to help with my post-surgical care. Uncle Robert coordinated a meal delivery schedule that ensured I would have home-cooked food throughout my recovery, and various cousins offered to handle everything from grocery shopping to prescription pickups. Derek visited every day, bringing books, magazines, and updates about the legal proceedings he had initiated to dissolve his marriage. The annulment process was complicated by the fact that the marriage was less than 48 hours old, but Derek's attorney was confident that the circumstances surrounding Hannah's deception about family relationships would provide grounds for voiding the union. "While Hannah tried to convince me that she didn't know how serious your condition was," Derek told me during one of his visits, "she claimed that your parents had convinced her that you were exaggerating and that she was just following their lead." "Do you believe her?" I might have believed her if I hadn't heard her laughing about your situation with her bridesmaids," Derek said sadly. "She knew you might die, and she thought it was funny that you were desperate for help. That's not someone I can spend my life with." The most difficult part of my recovery was dealing with my parents' attempts to reconcile and minimize the damage they had caused. They had lost their inheritance, their standing within the extended family, and their daughter's trust, but they seemed to believe that apologies and explanations might restore their previous relationships. My father called my hospital room repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from defensive justifications to tearful pleas for forgiveness. My mother sent flowers with notes claiming that she had been misunderstood and that she had always cared about my well-being despite appearances to the contrary. But the most revealing moment came when they visited me in person 3 days after my surgery, arriving with expensive gifts and prepared speeches about family reconciliation. "Alexis, we want you to know that we've learned from this experience," my mother said, settling into the visitor's chair with the kind of calculated remorse that suggested she had rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "Wiki, we realize now that we made some mistakes in how we handled your medical situation," my father added, "but you have to understand that we were under enormous stress with the wedding planning, and we weren't thinking clearly about all the implications." "Mistakes," I repeated weakly from my hospital bed. "You chose Hannah's party over my life, and then you lied to the entire family about it." "We didn't choose the wedding over your life," my mother protested. "We thought your surgery could be delayed without serious consequences. The doctors made it sound much more urgent than it actually was." Even after everything that had happened, my collapse at the wedding, the emergency surgery, the confirmation that I had been hours away from potential heart failure, my parents were still trying to rewrite the narrative to minimize their culpability. Mom, I almost died. Dr. Martinez said another day or two of delay might have been fatal. Errors, but you didn't die, my father said, as if that fact somehow vindicated their previous decisions. Everything worked out in the end, and now we can move forward as a family. Oh, everything worked out because Grandma Rose paid for my surgery, and Derek exposed your lies, I pointed out. You didn't contribute anything to saving my life. We want to contribute now, my mother said eagerly. We can pay you back for the surgery costs, and we want to help with your recovery expenses. With what money you spent everything on Hannah's wedding and your European vacation? My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I realized that their offers to help were just as hollow as their apologies. They had no money available to back up their promises, and they were hoping that gestures and words would be sufficient to restore family relationships they had destroyed through their actions. The vacation can be canceled, my father said reluctantly. We can use that money to help you instead. You're offering to cancel your vacation now that I've already had surgery and don't need your help anymore. The conversation continued in circles with my parents alternately making excuses for their behavior and offering assistance that came far too late to matter. They seemed genuinely unable to comprehend the magnitude of what they had done or the permanent damage they had caused to our family relationships. By the time they left, I had made a decision that would shape the rest of my recovery and my future relationship with my biological family. I was going to focus my energy on the people who had shown up for me when I needed them most, rather than waste time trying to rehabilitate relationships with people who had proven themselves fundamentally unreliable when it mattered. 2 weeks into my recovery, I was finally strong enough to return to my apartment, though my daily routine now revolved around cardiac rehabilitation exercises, multiple medications, and regular checkups with Dr. Martinez. The mechanical heart valve that had saved my life required ongoing monitoring and lifestyle adjustments, but the alternative, not being alive at all, that made every inconvenience feel manageable. Derek had become an unexpected constant in my new reality, stopping by most evenings after work to check on my progress and help with practical tasks that were challenging during my recovery period. His marriage to Hannah had been officially annulled after less than 2 weeks, a process that was expedited when Hannah didn't contest the dissolution and actually seemed eager to put the entire wedding experience behind her. I think she's embarrassed more than anything else, Derek explained as we sat in my living room, sharing takeout from a Thai restaurant that accommodated my new dietary restrictions. Everyone who attended the wedding knows exactly why I filed for annulment, and her social media has been flooded with questions about what really happened. Have you talked to her since the annulment was finalized? She called me once to ask if I would consider keeping the details of our separation private for the sake of her reputation, Derek said with a bitter laugh. I told her that her reputation was destroyed the moment she chose to let her sister die for a perfect wedding day. Derek had also shared some disturbing information about my parents' financial situation that explained their increasingly desperate attempts to reconcile with me. Their European vacation wasn't the only major expense they were facing. The wedding itself had been funded largely through credit cards and a second mortgage on their house, leaving them in serious debt despite their previous claims of financial stability. Your cousin Jake told me that they borrowed against their retirement savings to pay for Hannah's dress, and the photographer, Derek said. They're in much worse financial shape than anyone realized. So they were hoping to ask me for money after the wedding to help them recover financially. Exactly. That's why they were so angry about your surgery expenses. They were counting on being able to guilt you into helping them pay off wedding debt instead of having to contribute to your medical costs. The revelation added another layer of calculated selfishness to my parents' behavior that I was still trying to process. They had not only prioritized wedding expenses over my life, but they had planned to manipulate me into paying for those expenses afterward, assuming I would feel obligated to help them avoid the financial consequences of their own poor decisions. The contrast between my parents' manipulative approach and the genuine support I was receiving from my extended family was stark and consistent. Aunt Carol visited twice a week with home-cooked meals that met my cardiac dietary requirements. Uncle Robert had connected me with job opportunities that would allow me to work from home during my extended recovery, and various cousins checked in regularly to ensure I had everything I needed. Grandma Rose had also followed through on her threat to exclude my parents from family events, hosting a gathering at her house where relatives discussed establishing new traditions that didn't include Patricia and Thomas until they demonstrated genuine remorse and made substantial amends for their behavior. We can't pretend that what they did was acceptable just because they're family, Grandma Rose explained to me during one of her visits. They chose wedding expenses over their daughter's life, and then they lied to all of us about it. Those aren't the actions of people who understand what family means. The family had also established a medical emergency fund in my honor, with contributions from relatives who wanted to ensure that no family member would ever again face financial barriers to essential medical care. The fund had already accumulated several $1,000s and was growing as word spread to extended family members who had been horrified to learn about my experience. But the most shocking revelation came during Derek's visit on a Tuesday evening when he arrived with information about my parents' behavior that was even more disturbing than anything I had previously discovered. Alexis, I need to tell you something that I learned today, but I'm warning you that it's going to be hard to hear. What is it? Derek pulled out his phone and scrolled to a series of text messages that he had screenshotted before showing them to me. Hannah sent me these messages yesterday, apparently thinking that I might be willing to reconcile with her if she provided information that made you look bad. The messages were from my sister sent 2 days earlier. Derek, I know you're angry, but there are things about Alexis that you don't understand. She's always been jealous of my relationship with our parents, and she has a history of creating medical crises when other people are getting attention. She did the same thing when I got engaged. Suddenly had panic attacks and anxiety issues that required family meetings and emotional support. The heart surgery timing was suspicious from the beginning. Ma, what I'm about to tell you has to stay between us, but Mom and Dad found evidence that Alexis researched her heart condition online extensively before claiming it was an emergency. She knew exactly what symptoms to report and what test results would sound convincing. I think she deliberately delayed seeking treatment so that she could create a crisis during my wedding week. I have phone records showing that she called our parents 12 times in 2 days, which proves she was harassing them for attention. Normal people don't call their family that frequently unless they're trying to manipulate a situation. Derek, she almost destroyed our wedding with fake medical drama, and now she's trying to destroy our marriage by convincing you that I'm heartless. I stared at the messages in disbelief, trying to process the fact that my sister was still actively trying to destroy my credibility, even after my surgery had proven that my condition was genuine and life-threatening. Derek, she's claiming that I faked a heart valve failure that required emergency surgery. It gets worse, Derek said grimly, scrolling to additional messages. She also sent me copies of internet search histories that she claims prove you were researching heart conditions before your diagnosis. The evidence Hannah had provided was a series of screenshots showing Google searches for heart valve problems, cardiac symptoms, and surgical procedures. Searches that I had indeed performed after receiving my diagnosis, as any rational person would do when facing a serious medical condition. When Hannah is presenting your research into your own diagnosed condition as proof that you invented the condition, Derek explained, she's trying to convince me that you deliberately made yourself sick or lied about test results to create a medical emergency. That's insane. Dr. Martinez has years of documentation about my heart condition, and the surgical team confirmed that my valve was severely damaged. I know that, and anyone with basic medical knowledge would know that. But Hannah is counting on the fact that most people don't understand how heart conditions work. She's hoping to create enough doubt that I might question whether you really needed emergency surgery. Derek showed me one final message that revealed the depth of my sister's delusion and desperation. Derek, if you investigate this situation objectively, you'll realize that Alexis manipulated all of us. She's not the victim here. We are the victims of her attention-seeking behavior and emotional manipulation. She destroyed my wedding day, ended our marriage, and turned our entire family against our parents. She's dangerous, and I think she might have borderline personality disorder or another serious mental health condition that makes her create chaos in other people's lives. Reading my sister's words felt like being punched in the stomach. Even after witnessing my collapse, my emergency surgery, and the medical confirmation of my critical condition, Hannah was still trying to paint me as the villain. In a story where she had literally chosen to let me die rather than postpone her party. Derek, she really believes this, doesn't she? Either she believes it, or she's hoping that if she repeats the lies often enough, other people will start to believe them, Derek said sadly. Either way, it confirms that annulling our marriage was the right decision. That evening, after Derek left, I spent a long time thinking about the implications of Hannah's continued attempts to discredit my medical emergency. The fact that she was still working to convince people that I had faked a heart condition that required emergency surgery showed a level of delusion or malice that I wasn't sure I could ever forgive. But her messages had also inadvertently revealed something else. My parents' financial situation was even more desperate than Derek had previously indicated. Hannah's final text message mentioned that our parents were facing foreclosure on their house due to wedding-related debt and were hoping to convince me to provide financial assistance once our family relationships were repaired. My parents hadn't just chosen wedding expenses over my life. They had bankrupted themselves in the process, and they were now planning to manipulate me into bailing them out of the financial crisis they had created through their own poor decisions. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that the next phase of my recovery would involve not just healing from surgery, but also deciding how to handle family members who continued to view me as either a source of money or a threat to their carefully constructed narratives about their own behavior. 3 weeks after my surgery, Hannah appeared at my apartment door without warning, arriving on a Tuesday afternoon when she presumably thought I would be alone and vulnerable. I saw her through my peephole before opening the door, noting that she looked haggard and exhausted in a way that suggested the collapse of her marriage and her social reputation was taking a significant toll. "Shaya, Alexis, we need to talk," she said the moment I opened the door, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. "This situation has gotten completely out of hand and it needs to stop." "What situation?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this conversation was heading. "You know exactly what situation. Derek filed for annulment because of lies you told him about our family, and now our parents are facing financial ruin because of the chaos you created. You got your surgery, you got your attention, and now you need to fix the damage you've caused." The accusation was so breathtakingly unfair that I had to sit down to absorb the full scope of my sister's delusion. Even after everything that had happened, Hannah was still framing herself as the victim of my attention-seeking behavior. "Hannah, I didn't lie to Derek about anything. I told him the truth about how our family responded to my medical emergency." "Your medical emergency," Dorothy repeated mockingly. "You mean the convenient heart crisis that happened to occur during my wedding week, requiring immediate attention and financial assistance that derailed everyone's plans. I mean the heart valve failure that almost killed me and required emergency surgery to prevent cardiac arrest." "Gay, stop exaggerating. You had a minor procedure that you turned into a major drama to steal attention from my wedding. If your condition had been as serious as you claimed, the doctors would have insisted on immediate surgery regardless of your ability to pay. Hannah's refusal to acknowledge the reality of my medical situation, even after witnessing my collapse and emergency surgery, was both infuriating and deeply sad. She had constructed a version of events in her mind where I was the villain and she was the innocent victim, and no amount of evidence seemed capable of penetrating that delusion. Hannah, Derek ended your marriage because he heard you laughing about my medical crisis with your bridesmaids. He ended it because you demonstrated that you were willing to let me die rather than postpone your wedding. Derek ended our marriage because you manipulated him with sob stories and fake medical records, Hannah shot back. You convinced him that I was heartless when I was just trying to protect my family from your emotional manipulation. Fake medical records. I've done research into heart valve conditions, and what you claim to have is extremely rare in people your age. The timing was too convenient, and the symptoms you described were textbook examples that anyone could have looked up online. I stared at my sister in amazement, realizing that she had created an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid confronting the truth about her own behavior. In Hannah's version of reality, I had somehow faked a congenital heart defect that had been documented by cardiologists for years, convinced multiple doctors to participate in an elaborate fraud, and undergone unnecessary surgery just to ruin her wedding day. Ujay, Hannah, Dr. Martinez has been monitoring my heart condition since I was 22. I have 6 years of medical records documenting the progressive deterioration of my valve function. Medical records can be manipulated, and doctors can be convinced to exaggerate conditions if patients are persistent enough about claiming symptoms. The conversation was becoming increasingly surreal as Hannah doubled down on her belief that my entire medical emergency had been an elaborate performance designed to steal attention from her wedding. But her next words revealed the real reason for her visit, and it had nothing to do with concern for family relationships. Alexis Derek won't take my calls, and our entire social circle knows that he filed for annulment because of things you said about our family. My reputation is destroyed. My marriage is over, and Mom and Dad are about to lose their house because of the financial chaos you created. How did I create financial chaos? Oh, the wedding expenses were manageable when they thought you would contribute to paying them off afterward, Hannah said, finally revealing the financial manipulation that Derek had suspected. They borrowed money for my wedding based on the assumption that you would help them recover the costs the way families do when they support each other during major life events. They expected me to pay for your wedding. They expected you to contribute to family expenses the way any decent daughter would, instead of selfishly demanding that they spend money on unnecessary medical procedures. The entitlement was breathtaking. My parents had spent $30,000 on Hannah's wedding, assuming they could guilt me into reimbursing them afterward, and, when I had needed medical care instead, they had treated my life-threatening condition as an inconvenience that interfered with their financial planning. Hannah, even if I wanted to help with wedding expenses, I don't have money to give anyone. I just had emergency surgery that wiped out my savings. You have access to money, Hannah said with confidence that suggested she had inside information about my financial situation. Grandma Rose paid for your surgery, and she's probably willing to give you additional money for other expenses. Uncle Robert mentioned that the family started some kind of medical fund in your name. You could access those resources to help Mom and Dad avoid foreclosure. The request was so audacious that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. Hannah wanted me to ask my extended family for money to bail out our parents. The same parents who had refused to help save my life and had then lied to everyone about my condition. You want me to ask Grandma Rose to give me money so I can give it to Mom and Dad? Oh, I want you to take responsibility for the consequences of your actions, Hannah said sharply. You created this crisis by refusing to handle your medical situation quietly, and now you need to help fix the problems you caused. Hannah, I almost died. Our parents chose your wedding over my life, and when the truth came out, the family was horrified by their behavior. I didn't create that crisis. Mom and Dad created it by making choices that revealed their true priorities. They made choices based on incomplete medical information and time pressure from wedding logistics, Hannah countered. If you had been honest about the severity of your condition from the beginning, instead of being dramatic and vague, they would have responded differently. I was completely honest about my condition. I told them I needed surgery within 2 weeks or I could die, and they told me Hannah's wedding was more important. You told them you thought you might need surgery eventually, and they explained that wedding expenses made it difficult to provide financial assistance immediately. You escalated the situation by making it sound like an emergency when it was really just poor timing. Hannah had rewritten the entire sequence of events in her memory, transforming my desperate pleas for help during a medical crisis into dramatic escalation of a non-urgent situation. She had convinced herself that our parents were reasonable people who had been manipulated by my exaggerations rather than cruel people who had explicitly chosen wedding expenses over their daughter's survival. Why, Hannah, I have recordings of my conversations with Mom where she clearly states that your wedding is more important than my life, even if my condition really is as serious as I claimed. Recordings that were taken out of context during stressful conversations, Hannah dismissed immediately. Mom was overwhelmed with wedding planning and didn't have time to research your medical claims thoroughly. She was trying to balance multiple family priorities, not choosing between your life and my wedding. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes with Hannah becoming increasingly agitated as I refused to accept responsibility for the consequences of my parents' choices. She seemed genuinely convinced that I had orchestrated the entire medical emergency to sabotage her wedding, and that I now had a moral obligation to repair the damage I had allegedly caused. Well, see, Hannah, I'm not going to ask my extended family for money to help people who refuse to help me during a life-threatening medical emergency. Then you're going to let Mom and Dad lose their house because of your selfishness. I'm going to let Mom and Dad face the consequences of their own financial decisions, just like they were willing to let me face the consequences of my medical condition without their support. Hannah left my apartment that afternoon with a final threat that revealed just how completely our relationship had deteriorated. Alexis, if you don't help fix this situation, I will make sure that everyone in our family knows what kind of person you really are. I will tell them about your history of attention-seeking behavior, your manipulation of Derek, and your refusal to help family members who are struggling financially. As I watched my sister drive away, I realized that she was planning to wage a campaign of character assassination against me within our extended family, hoping to convince relatives that I was the real villain in a story where she had chosen to let me die rather than postpone her party. But Hannah had overlooked one crucial fact in her planning. Our extended family had already seen the recordings of our parents' conversations, they had witnessed my collapse at the wedding, and they had watched me undergo emergency surgery that confirmed the severity of my condition. Her attempts to rewrite history would be competing with documentation and first-hand observations that contradicted her narrative. The fracture in our family was now complete and permanent. Hannah had chosen to double down on her delusion rather than confront the truth about her behavior, and she was planning to spend her energy attacking me instead of taking responsibility for her role in nearly causing my death. As evening fell, I found myself feeling not sadness, but relief. The people who truly loved me had already shown their support, and the people who didn't love me had already shown their true nature. Hannah's visit had simply confirmed what I already knew. Some family relationships can't be repaired because they were never built on genuine love and concern in the first place. 6 weeks after my surgery on a cold Thursday evening in late November, I heard familiar voices outside my apartment door. My parents arguing in hushed tones about what they were going to say and who was going to take the lead in the conversation they had come to have. I had been expecting this visit for days, ever since Derek mentioned that my family's financial situation had become so desperate that foreclosure proceedings were imminent. When I opened the door, I was shocked by how much my parents had aged since the wedding. My father's hair seemed to have gone grayer. My mother had lost weight in an unhealthy way that made her clothes hang loosely on her frame, and both of them wore the haggard expressions of people who had been living under extreme stress for an extended period. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother said tentatively, as if she wasn't sure whether I would even acknowledge her presence. "Could we come in and talk to you about something important?" I stepped aside to let them enter, noting that they both glanced around my apartment with the kind of assessment that suggested they were cataloging my possessions and living situation for information that might be relevant to their visit. "You look much better," my father observed as we settled into my living room, and I realized he was right. 6 weeks of cardiac rehabilitation, proper nutrition, and freedom from life-threatening stress had restored much of my health and energy. I looked like someone who was thriving while they looked like people whose world was falling apart. "The surgery went well," I said, simply, not offering additional details about my recovery or my current quality of life. "We're so glad," my mother said, though her tone suggested that my improved health was complicated news rather than purely positive. "Alexis, we came here tonight because we need to talk to you about some family issues that have developed since the wedding." "What kind of issues?" My parents exchanged glances, and I could see them trying to decide who would deliver the bad news they had come to share. The wedding expenses were more significant than we had anticipated. My father began carefully, and some of the financial arrangements we made to cover those costs have become problematic. "Well, we're facing foreclosure on the house," my mother said bluntly, abandoning whatever tactful approach they had planned. "The second mortgage we took out to pay for Hannah's wedding has an adjustable rate, and the payments have increased beyond what we can afford. We have 60 days to come up with $12,000, or we're going to lose our home." My father continued, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. The news was sad but not surprising, given what I had learned about their reckless borrowing to fund wedding expenses. What was surprising was their decision to share this information with me, since they had made it clear that my financial difficulties were not their responsibility. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your situation," I said carefully, waiting for them to explain why they thought their mortgage problems were relevant to me. "Alexis, we know that we made mistakes in how we handle your medical emergency," my mother said, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "We were under enormous stress with wedding planning, and we didn't fully understand the severity of your condition. We want to make things right between us," my father added. "We want to be the kind of parents who support you properly, and we want to rebuild our family relationships. We've learned from this experience," my mother continued, "and we want you to know that if you ever have another medical emergency, we will handle it completely differently." The apologies sounded rehearsed and strategic, rather than genuine, as if they were saying what they thought I wanted to hear in order to achieve some other goal. "Thank you for the apology," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed their claims about learning from the experience. "Alexis, there's something else we need to discuss," my father said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "We know that Grandma Rose paid for your surgery, and we've heard that there's also some kind of family medical fund that was established to help with your recovery costs." "That's correct." "We were hoping," my mother said hesitantly, "that you might be willing to help us avoid losing the house, given that you now have access to financial resources that could make a difference." The request hung in the air between us, and I found myself struggling to comprehend the audacity of what they were asking. The same parents who had refused to help me pay for life-saving surgery were now asking me to use the money that my extended family had provided for my medical care to bail them out of a financial crisis they had created through their own poor decisions. "You want me to give you money to save your house. We want you to help your family during a difficult time," my father said, framing the request as a moral obligation rather than a financial favor. "The way you helped me during my difficult time—" "Alexis, that's not fair," my mother said defensively. "We've already acknowledged that we made mistakes during your medical situation. We're asking you to be the bigger person and help us move forward as a family." "You want me to be the bigger person by giving you money that was donated to help with my medical recovery. We want you to recognize that family members support each other during crises," my father said, apparently without any awareness of the irony in his statement. "Like the way you supported me when I was facing heart failure." My parents had clearly anticipated this line of questioning and had prepared responses that they thought would convince me to provide financial assistance. "Alexis, we understand that you're still angry about how we handled your surgery situation," my mother said, "but we need you to understand that we were dealing with limited resources and competing family priorities. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had at the time. You had $30,000 for wedding expenses, $25,000 for jewelry gifts, and $12,000 for a European vacation, but you claimed you couldn't afford to help with my surgery. Those weren't liquid assets," my father explained using financial terminology that suggested he had researched justifications for their previous decisions. The money for Hannah's wedding was committed to vendors months in advance, and canceling those arrangements would have resulted in substantial penalties. "So you chose to avoid vendor penalties rather than save my life." "We chose to honor our financial commitments while hoping that your surgery could be delayed until we had more flexibility in our budget," my mother said, making it sound like a reasonable business decision, rather than a choice to prioritize party expenses over their daughter's survival. The conversation continued for another hour with my parents, alternately apologizing for their previous behavior and justifying that same behavior as understandable given the circumstances they faced. They seemed to believe that acknowledging their mistakes, while explaining why those mistakes were reasonable, would convince me to provide the financial assistance they needed. "Alexis, we know we hurt you, and we want to make amends," my father said as their visit was winding down. "Helping us save the house would give us the stability we need to be better parents and better grandparents to any future children you might have. You're asking me to pay for the opportunity to have a relationship with parents who chose wedding expenses over my life. We're asking you to invest in rebuilding our family relationships," my mother said. "We're asking you to help us get to a place where we can focus on what really matters instead of struggling with financial stress." "What really matters?" "Oh, family," my father said firmly. "Love, support, being there for each other during difficult times. The way you were there for me when I was dying." My parents didn't have a good answer for that question, and they finally left my apartment that evening with promises to give me time to think about their request, and assurances that they would understand whatever decision I made. After they left, I sat in my living room thinking about the profound difference between their definition of family relationships and the definition I had learned from my extended relatives over the past 6 weeks. My parents viewed family as a source of financial assistance during crises they had created through their own poor choices, while my aunts, uncles, and cousins had demonstrated that family meant showing up with practical support, emotional care, and genuine concern for each other's well-being. The choice between those two versions of family relationship was actually quite easy to make. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear with the kind of golden autumn light that made everything seem possible. I had been out of the hospital for 2 months. My cardiac rehabilitation was going exceptionally well, and Dr. Martinez had declared my recovery to be ahead of schedule in every measurable way. More importantly, I had spent those 2 months learning to distinguish between people who claimed to love me and people who actually demonstrated love through their actions. My parents arrived at my apartment promptly at 10 in the morning, clearly expecting an answer to their request for financial assistance. They looked more hopeful than they had during their previous visit, and I suspected they had convinced themselves that my silence over the past week indicated I was seriously considering their proposal. Good morning, sweetheart, my mother said, with a brightness that seemed forced but determined. Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed? "Oh, I have," I said, gesturing for them to sit down in my living room. "And I've made a decision about how I want to handle our family relationship going forward." My father leaned forward expectantly, and I could see the relief beginning to form on his face as he anticipated what he assumed would be my agreement to help them avoid foreclosure. "Before I give you my answer about the money," I said calmly, "I want to share something with you that I've learned over the past 2 months." My parents nodded encouragingly, probably expecting me to deliver some kind of speech about forgiveness and moving forward as a family. "Say, I've learned the difference between people who love you and people who merely claim to love you." I began, my voice steady and clear. "People who actually love you show up when you're in crisis, even when it's inconvenient. They prioritize your well-being over their social plans, and they don't abandon you when helping you requires sacrifice." My mother's smile began to falter as she realized this wasn't heading in the direction she had hoped. "People who merely claim to love you," I continued, "will choose party expenses over your survival lie to extended family about your condition, and then ask you for money when their poor decisions create consequences they don't want to face." "Alexis, we've already acknowledged that we made mistakes," my father said quickly, trying to redirect the conversation. "We want to focus on moving forward, not relitigating the past." "The past is relevant because it reveals character," I replied, "and character determines whether people can be trusted with important relationships." I reached over to my coffee table and picked up a folder that contained documents I had prepared for this conversation. Not just for my parents' visit, but for my own clarity about the boundaries I needed to establish. "You asked me to help you avoid foreclosure by giving you money that my extended family provided for my medical recovery. That request helped me understand something important about how you view family relationships." "We view family as people who support each other during difficult times," my mother said defensively. No," I said firmly. "You view family as a people who are obligated to bail you out of crises you created while having no obligation to help them during crises they didn't create." I opened the folder and pulled out a printed copy of the recording from my conversation with my mother on the morning of Hannah's wedding. The conversation where she explicitly stated that the wedding was more important than my life, even if my condition really was as serious as I claimed. This recording has been shared with Dr. Martinez, with the social worker at the hospital, and with several family law attorneys, I said, placing the transcript on the coffee table between us. "Everyone who has heard it agrees that what you did constitutes a form of emotional abuse and medical neglect." My parents' faces went pale as they realized I had been building a case documenting their behavior, rather than simply nursing hurt feelings that could be overcome with time and apologies. "You're threatening us?" my father asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "When I'm establishing boundaries," I corrected, "I'm making it clear that your crisis is not my problem anymore, just like you made it clear that my crisis was not your problem." I pulled out a second document from the folder, a letter that I had written to crystallize my thoughts about our future relationship. "I've decided that I'm willing to consider rebuilding a relationship with you under specific conditions," I said, reading from the letter I had prepared. "First, you need to attend family therapy with a counselor who specializes in medical trauma and family dysfunction. Second, you need to make genuine amends to every extended family member you lied to about my condition. Third, you need to take full financial responsibility for the consequences of your own decisions without asking me or anyone else to bail you out. Those conditions are unreasonable, my mother protested. We can't afford therapy, we can't change what we said to family members, and we can't handle our financial problems without some kind of help. Those aren't my problems to solve, I said calmly. Those are natural consequences of choices you made when you decided that wedding expenses were more important than your daughter's life. I pulled out the final document from my folder, a letter from my attorney outlining the legal protections I had put in place to prevent my parents from making claims against my medical fund or attempting to manipulate other family members into providing financial assistance on their behalf. Your attorney? My father asked, clearly shocked that I had taken legal steps to protect myself from their potential financial manipulations. My attorney specializes in elder abuse and medical neglect cases, I said. She helped me understand that what you did to me during my medical emergency could have legal consequences if I chose to pursue them. The threat was subtle but clear. If my parents continued to harass me or other family members for money, or if they attempted to spread false information about my medical condition, there could be legal ramifications beyond just family disapproval. Alexis, we're your parents, my mother said desperately. We brought you into this world, we raised you, we sacrificed for you throughout your childhood. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Yay, it means that your betrayal during my medical emergency was even more painful than it would have been if strangers had abandoned me, I said honestly, but it doesn't mean that I owe you financial support when you refuse to provide me with life-saving support. I closed the folder and looked directly at both of my parents, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced since before my medical crisis began. But I want to be clear about something, I said. I didn't survive my surgery just to spend my recovery trying to manage relationships with people who demonstrated that they don't actually care whether I live or die. I survived so that I could build a life surrounded by people who value me as much as I value them. What about family loyalty? My father asked weakly. I learned about family loyalty from Grandma Rose, Aunt Carol, Uncle Robert, and all the cousins who showed up for me when I needed them most, I replied. I learned about family loyalty from Derek, who ended his marriage rather than enable someone who was willing to let me die. I learned about family loyalty from Marcus, who drove me to the emergency room and held my hand during the scariest moments of my life. I stood up, signaling that our conversation was ending. Those are the people I consider my real family now. Those are the people who will be part of my future, who will be invited to my home for holidays, and who will know my children if I ever have any. Poison us, my mother asked, tears streaming down her face. You can earn your way back into my life by demonstrating genuine change, not by asking for money or making excuses for choices that nearly killed me, I said firmly. Until then, your problems are not my problems anymore. My parents left that morning knowing that their request for financial assistance had been definitively rejected, and that their relationship with me would require genuine work to repair. Work that couldn't be accomplished through manipulation or appeals to obligation. As I watched them drive away, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my diagnosis, complete confidence in my own worth and complete clarity about what kinds of relationships I wanted in my life. Over the following months, my chosen family of extended relatives and close friends continued to demonstrate what love actually looks like. Derek became one of my closest confidants, someone who understood the complexity of discovering that people you trust can reveal themselves to be fundamentally different than you thought. Marcus remained a constant source of practical support and genuine friendship. Grandma Rose became a weekly fixture in my life, sharing stories and wisdom that helped me understand how to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My parents did eventually lose their house, and Hannah's reputation in our social circle never recovered from the revelation that she had chosen wedding planning over her sister's life. But their consequences belonged to them, just as my healing and my future belonged to me. 6 months after my surgery, I received a call from Dr. Martinez with news that my heart function was now better than it had been in years, and that my long-term prognosis was excellent. As I hung up the phone, I realized that surviving my medical emergency had taught me something more valuable than I had initially understood. I had learned that love isn't something you owe to people because of biology or history. It's something you choose to share with people who demonstrate that they deserve it through their actions when it matters most. I had learned that family isn't defined by genetics, but by who shows up when you need them, who prioritizes your well-being over their convenience, and who celebrates your survival instead of resenting the disruption it caused to their plans. Most importantly, I had learned that my own life has value independent of other people's recognition of that value, and that I never again have to tolerate relationships with people who treat me as expendable. The girl who had begged her parents for help during a medical emergency had been replaced by a woman who knew exactly what she deserved from the people in her life, and who was no longer afraid to demand it. As I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by get-well cards from people who actually cared about my well-being, I realized that my heart surgery had saved more than just my cardiovascular system. It had saved me from wasting any more years trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. And that realization was worth more than any inheritance, any family approval, or any relationship built on obligation rather than genuine care. I want to know, have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Have you discovered that people you trusted weren't who you thought they were? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes knowing that others have faced similar challenges can help us feel less alone in our own difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength during life's most challenging moments. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve to be surrounded by people who value their life and well-being. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you are worthy of love that shows up when you need it most, not love that comes with conditions and limitations. Take care of yourselves and remember that sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose, not the one you were born into.